Ні, ми зазвичай притомаємо абсолютно. Це просто де як.
Тому 200 мегаваттів Калузька ПЕЦ не працює. 200 мегаваттів.
Кого воно працює?
А воно арма там. Влашку.
Про що мова? Як я намагався в Одесі турбіну на це поставити. Міжнародну контенту за територію ОПЗ. Це шанси, так.
Нафтохімічний комплекс, скажучи, що не працює. Карпатний підхід стоїть.
Така сировина деньги закриті.
Що трошки посунутися. Так, чудово, дякую.
Він стали якось опустив.
Добрий день, вітаю.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Atamanova, and it's my pleasure to see everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform. Today we have invited you to talk about an important topic. We will be talking about our power grid. We will be talking about the damage inflicted on it as a result of the Russian missile strikes. We will talk about the outlook for recovery and the lessons learned from the winters of years 22-23 and years 23-24 that we are through. So let me introduce our speakers. Joining us today are Oleksandr Kharchenko, Director of the Energy Industry Research Center. Also joining us is Volodymyr Omelchenko, Energy Programs Director and Razumkov Center, Gennadiy Ryabtsev, Energy Expert, and Yuriy Boyko, Advisor of the Prime Minister of Ukraine, member of the Ukrenergo Supervisory Board. Good afternoon, gentlemen. So let's start it in brief with the assessment of our power grid by the media. Let me quote just a little bit, and then I will ask you whether it is so or we have to add something. Russians decommissioned 100% of the generation of Centrenergo. 80% of DTEC facilities are either severely damaged or destroyed. On top of that, hydraulic power plant and other facilities of Ukrenergo remains under constant shelling, and in total, starting from middle March until now, the country has lost about 40% of the available generation. Do you agree with these figures? Or can you add something so we better understand what is the condition we ended up in? So, Mr. Oleksandr, well, probably let's start with you. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, in fact, the figures in the media, they may be a little bit imprecise and different from the real picture, but the total assessment is, in general, is as it's described. We have a clear deficit of the generating capacities, and if we compare the high voltage networks with the generating capacities, the condition of high voltage aerial networks is way better. Maybe Mr. Yuri can correct it. He's the source of information, so to say. But my assessment says that the threats from the high voltage lines are way less than those with the generation. And unfortunately, the problems with generation cannot be solved quickly, even if certain damages that were inflicted can be shortly mitigated and the reactor's operation can be resumed. My personal forecast is that we're going to live with the deficit for the 2 years to come, and that will be the normal condition of the Ukrainian power grid. Thank you, Mr. Oleksandr. Mr. Yuri, let me ask you, we understand that now we ended up in a situation when the shutdowns have already started. We are in May. This month is traditionally, it does not produce any load for our power grid. So what should we do today in order to be prepared for the winter coming? Well, good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Oleksandr, confirmed that dry statistics behind which there are really a lot of problems faced by the energy technicians, the scale of destruction that results from the rocket strikes or missile strikes of the months of March and April of year 24, you know, they are precise, and that discussion that is going on in the expert community resulted yesterday in restrictions that were imposed yesterday. But I'm convinced that realization of the objective reality, realization of the real condition of things, and the respective planning how to make the way out of this situation will be a good foundation to understand how can we plan the actions ahead to go through the following winter. And we have to realize that nobody is in possession of the magic stick, and the processes that will be happening to a certain extent are inevitable. Talking about those restrictions that were imposed just yesterday or the day ago, well, it's not a secret to everybody that we are going to live under conditions like that. Well, according to my evaluation, maybe until August. Well, August, September, I expect some improvement due to implementation of number of factors, starting from the end of the active repairs and maintenance on the nuclear power plants, and everything that will be active, like solar power plants. There will be a lot of solar generation in the system that for the time being is not being limited but is completely consumed inside of the system. On top of that, it's not even sufficient. Well, it still is going to be warm but not hot. This is why there will be already additional load on the system that traditionally arises during the hot month. It will be a little bit down, and in August and September we will live either almost or completely without deficit. But during the summer we have to get used to living under conditions that have arisen a day ago, unfortunately. Well, talking about May, those restrictions could have started a little bit later. Should it be for May not to be so cold? The energy technicians were mentioning it a lot of times. There's a clear dependence between the outside temperature and the load on the power grid. And if you study the load graphs, there is no sudden rise of consumption as a result of a fall of the temperature outside. There is a small lag, but it caught up with us, say, a day ago. People started using the heating devices to heat up their dwellings, and it resulted in the catastrophic deficit of the electric power in the system, even given the fact that we actively engage import and emergency aid. So internal resource was not sufficient. About 1600 megawatts were imported from outside, and to maintain the system in a balanced mode and in order to prevent the emergencies, the dispatchers had to resort to some extraordinary measures such as emergency power shutdowns for the consumers to bring the consumption to the available capacity of the system. Thank you, Mr. Yuri, for this comment, but we understand after September there will be October and November, and it's already of concern to the Ukrainians because I think, well, I personally feel that in the summer it will be easier to go through those shutdowns, but now we're thinking what winter is gonna be like if we start the shutdowns in May. I don't know, probably that's the question to everybody. What should the central and the local governments do to find out how do we go through the following winter? Well, I was not trying to evade the assessment of the situation in winter. I wanted to start with the simple things to make sure that everybody understands that even during the summer we will still have deficit. If we review some more broad long-term outlook, I'm sure that today we've gathered people here who will not end their meeting in discussion because we have the same point of view. Well, the winter will be inevitably difficult. The chances for restoration of what was destroyed during the 2 spring months to the full extent is such that restoration is impossible to the full extent. Well, the degree of damage is different. I cannot give you the exact details about the pace of restoration, renewal, and the grade of destruction. Well, all this information is available, but it shouldn't become public. But again, this figure, 8 gigawatts of the lost capacity that was described by Mr. Galushenko, the Minister of Energy, can be reduced during preparation to the winter, but not like multiple times. And again, the deficit, even given the warm winter, will still exist. We will be going through the following winter under conditions of restriction. That goes without saying. Another thing is the scale of the restrictions. It depends on the number of factors, such as logistics related to delivery of parts and components that can either expedite or prolong the process of restoration. But believe me, the energy technicians, they work 24/7. It may be a little bit of a too frequently used phrase, but that's true. If you check out their work, you will understand it's true. But again, our plans, our expectations that are realistic, believe me, they materialized as a lower level of deficit in winter. So to make it sure, we have to implement all of the measures that are necessary today. That populism that was expanded in the media, like why Tropirska thermal power plant was not protected with concrete sarcophagus. Well, let's be honest, like that's absolutely like sick, because whoever has ever seen the thermal power plant realizes, whoever's seen them physically, they realize that it's impossible to protect physically the machine room, the equipment room, the control room. Well, the transformers can be protected, the relay machinery can be protected, and this is already done, and this is something that helps us to maintain the situation at current level, at least, because the central networks, they serve as the backbone now. Definitely, if there is deficit in the system and there is nothing to transfer, yeah, we're facing such measure as power shutdowns, but the system of energy transportation at the beginning of the year 23, they've learned their lessons from that winter, and the wars are still underway, and this is exactly what allows us to supply electric power to all of the regions for the time being. And using this opportunity, having the microphone in my hand, in fact, until recently we had 2 regions where the restrictions were resulting from damage of the mainway networks. That was the city of Kharkiv, where all of the high voltage substations and internal generation was destroyed. That's a known fact. And also there were problems in Kryvyi Rih industrial district. And just a couple of days ago, we had good news, and the network restrictions on Kharkiv were lifted. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what exactly was done to make it sure what was switched on, what was switched off, but again, the restrictions were lifted. What does it mean? That given the sufficient amount of generated electric power in the system, there wouldn't have been those restrictions in Kharkiv. but now they will have restrictions on par with Ukraine, but not due to the damage, but due to the general deficit. We still have some restrictions in Kryvyi Rih that will be lifted. We plan them to have lifted within the next 3 weeks. Well, probably we will not solve the problem with the 100 supply of electric power to the industrial complex, but I hope we will make it. Well, talking about the preparation to the winter, I think my colleagues will be able to tell you more about this, but we are going to highlight the basic recommendations for the utility consumers, for the businesses under these existing really difficult conditions. Thank you, Mr. Gennadiy. Mr. Volodymyr, I would like to hear your opinion about what the central and local governments should do to make sure we go through this period with the least complications possible. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Well, really, the situation is quite complicated, but we have to understand that the enemy works to destroy not only power grid, but the whole of our country. This is why our task is not to cover 100% of consumers, because it's impossible due to the ruination that was described. But we have to preserve the integrity of the power grid, and I hope that with the help of our technicians who work real good and real loyal, we will be able to solve this issue not only during summer but during winter as well. And no matter how difficult it will be, we will be through the autumn and winter period having covered all the basic needs of the consumers, and we will be able to preserve the integrity of the power grid so it doesn't split into islands, so to say. What are we supposed to do? So first of all, the easiest and the fastest way is to increase the quota for the import of electric power. For the time being, it does not require any serious investment anytime. It's more of an organization work, a practical work, but today our capability to receive import is about 1700 gigawatts. Megawatts is the import of NCE standard, and we can increase it 1000 megawatts, so basically 1 gigawatt, which is one power reactor. This is something that we should work on, but again, it's necessary to mention that today it's not going to be so easy because we don't use the available quota to the full, those 1700 megawatts. Yeah, during some hours we do draw it to the full, but generally, even when there is deficit, this quota is not being used in full due to a number of reasons. First is like we don't have market cap in our market, such as the one existing in European Union. We have administrative regulations such as price caps and so on and so forth. And when we don't draw that available quota that is provided to us, it's difficult to talk to our European partners to increase it. This is why first we have to work out the mechanisms to draw the import capabilities to the full, not only through the emergency aid of Ukrenergo, because it's not always available, it's not always possible. European Union does not always have excessive power, and on top of that, that's pretty costly operation. The cost of emergency aid is higher, and it all falls on the shoulders of Ukrenergo. Their budget is not indefinite and bottomless. This is why it's important to engage the capacities of capabilities of the industry to procure the electric power through the traders. There is a regulation. If a business buys 30% of its electric power necessities, electric power needs during specific hours. They are not being switched off from the grid during shutdowns, and in winter this figure grows up to 50%. So this is why I think we should resort to increase of the quota of imported electric power. Another factor is the repair and maintenance campaign. It should be more efficient, and to make it sure, we have to bring our prices for electric power in accord to the market level, or bring them at least close to the market level, because currently electric power is supplied to the population for almost for free, virtually for free. The people only pay 2.64 hryvnia per kilowatt of electric power, but only for its distribution, but not its generation. And for the time being, neither Ukrenergo nor Hydroenergo, which is like destroyed, you know, the Kakhovka dam is destroyed, Dniprogas HPP is destroyed, and they are not capable of compensating this difference in prices. The same story is about Energoatom, that is initiating the repairs campaign, whose Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is currently occupied, and they don't have available funds to invest in this factor. This is why we have to raise tariffs for the population to make sure that the energy companies have available funds for restoration, because relying on our partners cannot be indefinite. Yes, they support us, but they cannot provide us with 100% of the necessary aid. And I think that during 1 year we are able to achieve the market level of prices for all of the consumers, with the subsidies for those who really need them, and those who do not, the people who are capable of paying for their consumer electric power should pay for it in full. And the last thing I need to mention is the management of demand of electric power. If we check out the experience of, say, Japan, you remember when there was an emergency in Fukushima power plant, all of the nuclear power plants operation was suspended in Japan. They had the same situation with the deficit as we have currently, and the government of Japan urged all of the citizens to suspend operation of air conditioners, other electric appliances, and people really voluntarily rejected the use of air conditioners and other electric appliances that they were used to operate. So the consciousness here helped. It helped the power grid of Japan. We should study this example of Japan, and if there is an opportunity in summer, people may refrain from use of some electric appliances. We have to reduce the application of use of high capacity appliances during peak hours, and of course accumulation systems can be used when people, for example, during the night, they can charge their accumulators and use them during peak hours, and other measures that may be of help to the energy technicians in order to balance the power grid operation. Thank you very much, Mr. Gennadiy. Well, there is a number of questions that journalists frequently ask, and I'll try to answer them right away. So why the shutdowns right now? Now there is the minimum of consumption. Why nuclear generation cannot support? Like, let's put the most load on it, and it will allow avoiding shutting down the consumers. We have to understand that the generation is supposed to cover the basic level and the level of maneuvering the consumption within a day, within a month, and within a year is fluctuating. And nuclear power plants, they supply electric power to the consumers 24/7, 365. That's unchangeable graph, unchangeable schedule. Maneuvering generation, hydraulic power plants and thermal power plants, they ensure the growth of consumption during morning and evening hours, specifically from 18 to 22 in the evening. This consumption peak is very sufficient. When 8 gigawatts, according to the Minister of Energy, when 8 gigawatts of maneuvering generation were destroyed, we started facing the problem with energy supply, energy consumption, specifically during those peak hours. But why it all cannot be covered by nuclear generation? Let it work incorrectly, let it generate more energy than necessary. Well, the problem is that during the summer period, nuclear reactors, to ensure the proper operation, to guarantee the safety and security of their operation, they are supposed to be decommissioned for the maintenance, and this maintenance is going on between the seasons. It's not so long actually, but all of the reactors are supposed to undergo this maintenance. This is why the power blocks are supposed to be decommissioned during the summer periods, so they can be maintained and later engaged up to 100% of their capacity during winter season. This is exactly why this deficit of electric power has arisen now, because the nuclear power plant reactors started being decommissioned for scheduled maintenance, and maneuvering generation was very significantly damaged. And unfortunately, we don't have anything to cover it with currently. This is why we can take this import of 1.7 gigawatts per hour. But first, we need to have the contract signed by the consumers to have this power supplied. If there are no such contracts, the system will not simply generate this amount of electric power that they can share with Ukraine, for example. And on top of that, those 1.7 gigawatts are the electric power that can be consumed in efficient ways, specifically in the western regions of Ukraine, because transportation of electric power from the western border of Ukraine to Kharkiv or even to Kryvyi Rih is not energy efficient, because it's related to a lot of loss during transportation. In view of that, we're seeing the worst condition if we compare the east and west bank. The most difficult condition is in the east bank, where the transportation of electric power is the most difficult, and where their proper own generation does not exist, and where the consumption is the biggest. We see Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkiv regions as the regions that are mostly affected by this situation. What we really need to do, what are we supposed to do now to make sure that these problems do not jeopardize? Yes, we need to have the capacity of our transportation networks to increase. In terms of import, I'm not sure that we will come to 2.7 gigawatts. In my opinion, it will be 2.2 the most, but again, 500 megawatts of electric power will not be excessive to anybody. But again, the consumers are supposed to enter into contracts with the supplier, so this amount of electric power is available with our partners, because emergency aid is not always available, and we see that using it during the night is sometimes even impossible. Another problem is the fact that currently the electric power that is being supplied by the consumers is given to the consumers by the utility suppliers for free, because if we calculate the tariffs, it turns out that this power comes for free. Its cost is zero. Meanwhile, the generators, Ukrenergo, all of those companies, they are state-owned. They are the companies that operate with certain costs, but then it results that they don't get any profit from sale of this electric power to the population within their obligations. And it's worth mentioning that those obligations are supposed to be rescinded if Ukraine aspires to become a member of European Union, because we have humongous problems with this accession of the state as a candidate to the European Union. We are being permanently reminded that you still retain these special obligations. So if we want to come one step closer to the accession to the European Union, if we want to help the power technicians, if we want to reduce the deficit that is existing for the time being, we are supposed to pay not 264 but maybe 4, maybe 5 plus hryvnia. It all depends on the calculation of the price for the industrial consumers and for the utility consumers. Yet another problem that we're supposed to solve, whatever it takes, is the problem of debt. We have incredible debt in the market of electric power. The Cabinet of Ministers continues postponing the solution of this problem because or with disregarding the resolution of the National Security and Defense Complex that contemplated that within a month this problem should have been solved. That meeting has taken place last year, but without solution of this problem we're not able to formulate the budgets, the turnover funds that we can channel to improve the process of restoration. What are we supposed to do with the generation? How to reduce the deficit in the system? The restoration of big power reactors is necessary only under a number of conditions. First, if there is enough time until the heating season to restore it. Second, if there is the equipment available for restoration of this or that reactor. It's not about money, it's not about promises from our partners like Lithuania or Germany to decommission something on their end and to supply it to us, but is the matter of whether this equipment is available now or it's on the way at least to this or that power plant. And where the third factor is whether we will be able to ensure the physical security of specific power plant against the missile strikes and drone strikes. If we cannot make it with these three factors, we have to use some other way without withdrawing from current maintenance and restoration works. But we have to create the network that consists of 300 branched small power plants that operate based off the existing power carriers, energy carriers. Those stations, those power plants should be united within small communities, small districts, small industry parks, to put them together at the small distribution system that will be connected to the mainway power grid, thus forming the market of additional services. It can be and it should be done without any hesitation, without any directions and resolutions of the central government. It all depends upon the initiative of the local governments. This equipment is available in Ukraine. All those boilers that operate on liquid and solid and gas fuel. This equipment is available in Ukraine. It's available with our partners, and they are not the diesel generators with 1 kilowatt capacity. Those are the electric power plant of cogeneration nature, those which can produce both electric and thermal power up to 50 kilowatts probably. If we have 300 plus such power plants, first of all, it's way easier to protect them. It's not like a soccer field, and it's not a 6-story building. Secondly, they are more difficult to damage. Third, they are independent on external conditions because they operate off the local power sources, and they ensure the energy autonomy. That would mean that the communities, the cities, the districts will not be dependent on those companies that distribute the electric power all across the state, those which generate the electric power for all of the country. It will allow to relieve the load from generating companies and Ukrenergo, thus making them able to focus on the problems of the military and industrial complex. Thank you, Mr. Gennadiy. Everything that you've just mentioned is similar to what Mr. Kudrytsky was presenting in our studio. He mentioned that he sees the future in decentralization of these big systems to make them more independent and small, and so that their damage does not result in collapse of the whole energy system of the whole region. I think that everybody agrees with this idea, but what should we do to start implementing it, Mr. Yuri, Mr. Oleksandr? Please, the floor is yours. Let me try to proceed to recommendations and the plan of actions on the level of large industrial consumers and utility consumers too. So, in my opinion, this plan is supposed to be called the survival plan. And to describe it in one word, what are we supposed to do? In my opinion, we should do everything that will enable our survival. So let me decipher it for you. Everything that can be restored within 10-month horizon is supposed to be restored. No maneuvering capacities or maneuvering generation will not help us to go through this winter, because physically it will not be constructed on a necessary scale. Second, those measures that are 95, or those activities that are 95% accomplished, those that covered with the reserved capacities. So this plan should be accomplished 100%, in fact, because without critical communal services to the utility consumers of the ministry buildings, no EcoFlow can compensate the absence of electric power in the apartment block, and the centralized preparation to such potentially critical hours. And we know during this winter there will be such hours inevitably. Well, I can continue finding synonyms, but you get the idea. So the state is supposed to ensure the maximum coverage of basic utility services. So that was the task for the winter 22-23 and 23-24. According to the reports from the local governments, all the programs were 90% completed, and we have to make sure whether it is so, whether their reserve sources of power are available, which are very important from the point of view of ensuring the proper operation, technical condition, availability, well, operability, availability of fuel. Because when you start testing the system, you start facing such surprising things. Something surprising for an average citizen, something unexpected, like the limit for non-licensed provision of fuel, like if you have more than 2,000 liters, you are supposed to have a license. But if we talk about a diesel generator for a boiler room, it can consume this amount of fuel within an hour. So but it is desirable for you to have a reserve for 5 days at least. That's the requirements of the emergency. So reserve power sources, monitoring of availability of fuel to ensure the coverage of centralized function, then building of the decentralized generation. In order to transform these words into real actions, we have to fulfill a number of activities. What we were able to do by now, and we may talk about it as a fact already, there was work done with the regulator. The regulators facilitated the connection to the electric power grid, to the gas power lines. The Cabinet of Ministers worked on the proposals of the participants or members of the market, being in communication with the people who do something like real, something where they have their hands on. They generate realistic requirements, and in view of the feasibility, given the feasibility parameters, those suggestions were taken into account, and the connection process was simplified. So I'm talking about the preconditions so that everybody understands what's going on. If the project of dispersed generation involves some people who know what they do, well, everybody knows that such project cannot be implemented within shorter than 6 months. Given the green corridor, it's 6 months. If this green corridor turns into a run with obstacles, this period will be longer. So now let's develop the logical quote from this thesis, from these words. We don't have theoretical preconditions for building this system until the following winter, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't do it. There will be another winter, and then another, and another one afterwards. It is a part of the strategic and logical program of restructuring of the national electric power grid. But let's not make assumptions and illusions and coming out with the messages in December like the money was stolen, no one has done anything. It's easy to sit on a couch, specifically when you cannot do something by yourself, and to generate some critics. We have to realize this program is proper, it's supposed to be fulfilled, but it's not going to influence the next winter. The preconditions that facilitate the construction are already created. Then we're coming back to the economic model. Any project, to make sure it's implemented with engaging foreign investors, and in my opinion that's the only way, because the government will not be able to build 5,000 to 6,000 of small power plants at their own cost, and that's exactly the number that can compensate what was destroyed during these 2 years. It's only investments that can help us here. Well, the investments can, well, are not supposed to be raised. They come where business processes exist, where there is a business process that generates the cash flow capable of compensating the capital expenses and operational expenses arising in the process of operation of such type of equipment. For the time being, the situation in Ukrainian power grid is as follows. Sometimes we get presented a power plant, so our capital expense is 0, and the plant operates off the natural gas and is not capable of financing its operational expenses as a result of the debt in the market, let alone the let alone the salaries to the operators, which are not so numerous, by the way. They wouldn't be even able to pay for the gas. So currently we continue in Ukraine the practice of free release of energy carriers. As soon as we start talking about the power, we start getting some populistic slogans creating the conditions for consumption of electric power for free. If this situation remains as is, if this model continues existing that allows not paying for the electric power, there will be no distributed generation. If we talk about the model of behavior of utility consumers, here obviously those problems that I've described, the consumers are not able to solve them. They count on the state to survive this winter, to go through this winter, and to preserve the state as it is generally. So if we talk about the utility consumer, obviously we are supposed to take all the steps to improve our energy independence. And here we're coming back to eco flow. If you have running water and heat in your home, then having bought a device that would allow you to pass your time more comfortably during the shutdowns in the winter, you can use this option. For those who use in private houses, well, I'm convinced not everybody can do that, but whoever can, please ensure your autonomous power supply sources like generators or solar panels that work in combined manner with generators to improve your energy independence. So whoever can do that, whoever is capable of doing this, please do that. And you know, there is yet another recommendation that we hear from everywhere, but again, when there is the sufficiently large number of people listening to it and adhering to it, is the economist or economic consumption. If there is 100 people who adhere to this recommendation, it will not produce some huge effect, but if the nature will be more massive, that will help the power grid sufficiently. I'm sure that the urges are not going to work. You know, we can do whatever we want, but the urges will not work. The Japanese model of behavior that my colleague has mentioned is not going to work in Ukraine. I'm sure about that 800%. So if you pay for the goods the price that you don't even notice, it destimulates the right behavior. It does not create preconditions. So to make sure that those messages that we hear from the government, that they work, we can keep saying whatever we want. We can provide examples, we can talk about distributed power plants, but as soon as there are emergency shutdowns, this is only when people start thinking about the problem. It's known way ahead. In March, it has become obvious that it would be the objective reality in which we will be living. And only yesterday I started getting calls from the industries that said that that resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers that was mentioned, that if they import at least 30% of their electric power needs, they are not subject to restrictions. But again, let me tell you something that cannot be explained by logic. Due to the situation in the system, the price in our market, average price, is significantly higher than with the neighbors. And at the same time, there is no import, which is only explained by the laziness and absolutely abstract model of behavior. So how to lift the restrictions from an enterprise? Those tools exist for more than a year and a half. It was just amended recently. And the bar was lowered, by the way. I think, if the memory doesn't fail me, the first requirement was 50% of consumption of imported electric power, and thus the industry or the facility was exempt from restrictions. But now nobody uses this instrument. Again, it cannot be explained by the common sense, because people were given a tool and they don't use them. Probably because to the lack of awareness, despite we had a lot of internet conferences with the biggest consumers in Ukraine, explaining them, demonstrating everything to them, but even until it came to the restrictions, those instruments did not work. They are all the elements of socially responsible behavior, and in fact, in my opinion, the restrictions that started a day ago will probably result in stimulation of the brains of those people to trigger some self-protection mechanisms. Thank you very much. I would like to give an opportunity to our journalists ask questions. Well, let me ask just a couple of questions. I agree with every single word Mr. Yuri has said, but let me give you a little bit more examples so people understand it better. So the real situation, I'm not calling the names, I'm not calling the names of the cities, but the real life situation. The donor has provided a huge gas turbine with the capacity of more than 50 megawatts, and they say to the local government, like, this is our gift to you. Here you go. The local government comes in a week and they say, no, we cannot do it. Well, the donor is surprised, like, wait, we've procured this turbine, we've procured like the auxiliary equipment. It costs a lot of money. How come? And the local government says, look, to install this turbine, we need to spend 500 million hryvnia. That's the real price they have to spend. And then we have to buy 50 million hryvnia worth of gas every month, and the situation in the market is such that in the best case we get paid for this gas in a month. We will be paid for this electric power in 1 year, only in 1 year, 15 months. Yeah, Mr. Yuri is tipping me. Well, in our dialogue it was 1 year, and for them it was 1 year was sufficient to refuse this generating tool in a city that suffers from the lack of electric power, because they understand due to the debt, due to the money problems, they wouldn't be able to install this turbine and operate it. And as a result, here's what we have. That's one example. Another example is about the reduction of consumption. I'm being frequently asked lately how to reduce the consumption. And we have a wonderful example of reduction of consumption. In 2013, Ukraine consumed 72 cubic meters of gas, and in the year to follow, it was twice as less. But there was a reform when the gas was for everybody. There were subsidies. It was the price that the government paid for this is their political carriers, but we reduced the consumption of gas twice, just like this, in a blink of an eye. Nobody got frozen, the GDP has not fallen, everything continued operating, but the consumption of gas has reduced. Is it a paradox? Absolutely. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is exactly what's going to happen to the electric power market as it comes to work on a market based on the market conditions. You're not gonna believe what is the amount of small businesses that are connected to the subway, and they have the specific, very specialized price for the consumption. Another problem is a riddle. What is the amount of funds being written off from the population consumption? Like, what is the amount of hotels that operate based on the utility tariff? And again, those who's gonna lose something, hundreds of millions of hryvnias, well, they will be severely affected as it happens. This is why there is a number of parameters that objectively force certain number of people struggling with those suggestions that were provided by Mr. Yuri, and they don't stop at anything in their struggle. And the last thing I would like to say, that the businesses can not only import, but also they may install their capacities. We are currently consulting a number of businesses who have procured some equipment. They've procured some gas piston equipment, the businesses that consume 10 to 12 megawatts of power per day, and they decided that for them it's easier to buy the equipment that will continue operating without interruption rather than risking due to the power shutdowns. And the majority of businesses, by the way, they are afraid of emergency shutdowns. You know, even if we import the electric power but the substation is destroyed, we're still getting disconnected one way or another. But again, the financial model that they've built for themselves, it demonstrates that the cost of operation of gas piston engine in case of optimal consumption is 4.5 hryvnia per kilowatt of power, which is below the market, and they can definitely afford this to cover their own needs. And people started investing in it, and the more such investments will be there, the better for the system, because it will be stabilizing consumption and reduction of the consumption in general. This is something I had to add. Yes, this is really important. Well, thank you. Questions, please. Karina Vakareva, not TSN, 1+1. I'm having a question to Mr. Yuri. It's about the power shutdown schedules in internet. The people are being forwarded to Yasna or Detect websites, but they are down and the situation has not changed lately. So how should the consumers find those schedules? Well, yeah, I can confirm it. All of the websites are currently down. Well, really, what's the logic of reduction of supply in the system? Ukrenergo understands the trend of the general consumption. They having analyzed it, they understand what is in deficit, and respectively what amount of consumption should be reduced. So basically physically disconnected from the network to compensate for and balance the grid. All those tasks are being sent to Oleksandr. Well, currently they are called the distribution network operators, so they get this information and they have the list of consumers who are subject to this or that turn, and they operate this information in case of application of the shutdown schedule in X megawatts per region. They understand that there will be turn 1, 2, 3, and then on the next day they will disconnect turn 5 or 4, 5, 6. So I cannot give you the exact answer because this information is available with the local energy companies' websites. I'm sure that 1 hour or 2 or 3 will basically will reduce the desire of the people who try to get this situation, because it's similar to DDoS attacks when there is a lot of attempts to visit the website and the website goes down due to its incapability of process this number of requests. So those schedules are in place, they exist. And I'm sure that basically today, within a day, the situation will be improved. Technically, people will be able to reach out to them and people will be able to understand what is their turn. In my opinion, the companies work pretty well with visualization of the graphs, but a whole different thing is when we talk about say yesterday's or the day before yesterday, well, when the schedules were implemented for the first time, the dynamic of growth of consumption was very long. Just the effect of the lag that I've mentioned, when the temperature gets cooler and the peak of consumption comes with the lag. We were engaged in the special disconnections, the special tool that allows disconnecting bigger number of consumption. So we're talking about implementation of extraordinary mechanisms that is not always in line with those schedules, but that's an exclusion again with those schedules published on the websites. But again, the temperature is getting warmer, the deficit is reducing. When there's a lot of sun during the day, the schedules will not be implemented, and they will be focused mostly during the peak hours and sometimes during the night to make sure that we can pump more to the hydroelectric power plants. So those schedules are going to be stabilized within a day or two, and everybody will be realizing during which time, which street in which city will be subject to implementation of this schedule, and they are not going to have the mass nature. Yesterday's schedules only were implemented on 10% of the consumers. It's just that they were not implemented, they were implemented for the first time during a long period. This is why it came as a surprise to all of the consumers. Well, we have another last question, and we're almost out of time. Good afternoon, Igor. Forbes, you've mentioned the recommendations. They are quite global recommendations in terms of reforms that were not done within the last 3 years and are hardly to be implemented within the next year. So why among those recommendations there are no some targeted ideas, like to cancel, for example, the import fee for the equipment, for the energy equipment, or to balance the power supply in Kharkiv region and to ensure the balanced operation in Kharkiv region, or for example to oblige Ukrenergo to pay to the generators of maneuvering generation. So why these issues are not discussed? Well, for what I understand, it's a question to me, right? Well, let me try to answer. Well, we were basically having only 2 minutes. So look, humanitarian aid is coming without any import fees. Everything that's coming for free is not subject to any fees. Again, the companies which procure equipment, we already have regulations that allow doing everything under facilitated procedures. Not everything, but a lot of things are done without import fees. Well, the solar panels, you know, it did not result in the reduction of prices in the market. It only resulted in generating more profit for the people who import them. So it's a contestable question. Talking about Kharkiv, Kharkiv is probably the only city where I've seen the good plan of preparation to the winter, very, very well detailed, where we do, what are the locations, what are the capacities, what it should be working, how is it integrated into the network. And about 60% of this plan is the understanding of humanitarian equipment that is supposed to be supplied to Kharkiv shortly. But again, let me repeat myself, I've only seen this plan for Kharkiv so far. Very well reasoned and grounded, worked out by all of the members of the local market. Talking about Naftogaz supplying something or like obliging something. Well, what does it mean, like obliging Naftogaz with something? They have their statutory obligations, and everybody is supposed to do what they can or what they were established for. I understand your aspirations, but Naftogaz can be involved in some works, but again, it's not their obligation to ensure, provide, supply something or build something at their own cost. To oblige Ukrenergo pay for the maneuvering generation. Well, Ukrenergo fulfills the function of the one who orchestrates everything. you know, that emergency aid is being paid for and compensated for from the balancing market. Let me give you an example. Usually the economy there is not so good. It's only the balancing market which pays with a lot of delays. But should we have a lot of power that is supplied to the network and the consumers pay for it, there will be no this emergency aid problem at all. The logic of compensation of the cost of the balancing market is described in all of the regulations. Well, all of the related regulations. So again, we cannot segregate better and worse maneuvering generators. Those who generate some electric energy and which was not paid for on the general market, that there is understanding of repayment to them pro rata based on the amount of their supply of electric power to the market. I think that Ukrenergo facilitated this process in a very transparent way. It's not worth changing those approaches. The problem is the consumption of electric power for free. Again, targeted measures are described in recommendations of the task forces that work with the National Security and Defense Council. It's 10 plus pages of activities in the electric power market and in the oil and gas market. I don't know when the next meeting of National Security and Defense Council is coming. I don't know when it happens. It was postponed recently due to a number of reasons, and there the matters that you described will be discussed. And on top of that, that obligation that you've mentioned, it's a part of the resolution of National Security and Defense Council related to the previous heating season. So it turns out that due to the martial law, it was implemented back then, but as we see, in compliance with the statute or articles of association, the purpose of operation of Naftogaz is obtaining profit. We can only do something based on their consent. So far we don't have their consent. Well, thank you very much for this comprehensive discussion. Thank you very much. I will see you just in a couple of minutes during the next briefing. Let's continue working for our victory. Stay tuned.